Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I want to thank you for joining us today for Love No Matter What with Rick Long, pastor of Grace Church in Arvada, Colorado. We live in perilous times of total uncertainty, 24-hour news, complete oversaturation of social media, and the fear of the unknown can leave you hopeless and afraid, but we are here to lift you up. Pastor Rick and Grace Church desire to give you hope and a purpose through an encouraging and life-changing message each week. At Grace, our mission statement is simple: hope for everyone and a home for anyone. We live this out through 4 simple words: love no matter what. Feel free to check out the notes for this message on our website at lnmw.tv to follow along. Here's Pastor Rick.
Hello, my friends. I'm Pastor Rick Long, and this is Love No Matter What. I want to thank you for joining us. It means a lot. And I hope that you are finding these principles not only revolutionary to your mind, but transformational for your life. You know, every message must come back to really 2 words: will you? Will you apply these principles? Last week, the 6 laws, irrefutable laws of finance and financial freedom. If you started to put those into practice, even in a week, you can begin to see incremental changes. And here's something that you don't always see. And sometimes, though you can count on it, you never know when it's going to happen. And that's this: when I honor God and I honor His word, He honors me. That's not a prosperity message that says if I give God $100, He's going to give me $10,000. That's not true. But it does say that God will meet all of my needs. That's what His word says. And He says it over and over. So as you put these into practice, you're going to see that principle play out. I want you to know, as you really look at the title of today's message, how to be truly financially free, I think everybody has a different definition for that. I would say that when my wife and I got married, she came from a very different socioeconomic background than I did. And we both had to make sacrifices immediately. We were full-time college students trying to graduate with 4-year degrees in 2 years, her in 3 years. And there was a lot going on in our lives. Financial freedom, I thought then, meant that you had all the money you needed to do whatever you wanted, and you'd never have to worry about it the rest of your life. That might sound like financial freedom, but to be honest with you, that's not freedom at all. Because you stop depending on God. You depend on your money. Financial freedom is not being enslaved to anyone or anything, but being completely surrendered to God in my finances. That means I have what I need to not only take care of the needs that I have, but bless others. And God says, as you bless others, you will continue to be blessed. So the laws of financial freedom that we talked about last week are complemented very nicely by this journey that we're going to go on for the next 25 minutes or so. Financial freedom is really having what I need to get to where I need to be for God's glory and His kingdom. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the wealthiest man in the Old Testament, probably also in the New Testament, and possibly for all time. I read in a couple of studies that today, Solomon's wealth would be numbered somewhere up into the $2.4 trillion. That means he's wealthier than Jeff Bezos, wealthier than Elon Musk, wealthier than Bill Gates. Heck, he's wealthier than the federal government that's in $25 trillion of debt. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 22 says, "So I saw that there is nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. That is our lot in life. And no one can bring us back to see what happens after we die." So what God wants is for us to enjoy our work. You're like, well, I thought work was a curse. No. Adam and Eve, when they were placed, created, and put in the Garden of Eden, were given jobs. Adam's job was to, with Eve, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and have dominion over it and name the animals. They had big jobs, but they didn't have to worry about the earth being corrupted by sin and thorns and bugs and dangerous snakes and all those kinds of things. Well, there was one dangerous snake, but that was Satan in the garden. But at the end of the day, work became painful after the fall of man. And the fact that we have to do it, and the fact that when we do it, so often we're not being fulfilled because of some factors. And I want to talk to you about what I call right now the 5 global stress factors. And this isn't just something I came up with, that's for sure. There's 5 global stress factors. And if you look right now, there's the viral infirmity, COVID. There's a lot of other viruses, actually. We have social instability. We've seen so much social instability. We've seen the riots. We've seen, what happened at the Capitol. I mean, it's just some really awful instability. I've seen this more in the last 2 years than really what we saw in the 60s and 70s. There's a financial insecurity. A lot of us are just financially insecure. There's racial inequality, and there's a political incivility. So if you think about those 5 stress factors, man, we got a lot going on. Those are storms. And I want you to know, as a pastor, and hopefully as your friend, I'm praying for you. I want to encourage you because it's hard. It's been hard for me too. It's not easy. But I want you to know that the Bible is not some dusty manuscript that was written 2,000 years ago, but it's God's living word. And did you know that during the first century, Christians were facing almost the exact same issues as the 21st century Christian, as us? As a matter of fact, I want to talk to you about some of those, but I want to kind of describe our struggles if I could. I think what COVID did and the economic shutdowns that honestly have caused far more damage than the virus itself. This situation has created one of 2 people. You're either, let's kind of use a river analogy. You're either in or a water analogy. You're either in a yacht. Many people went from, being in a boat to a yacht. They got wealthy. Things are really good. They flourished through COVID. And then there's the other group that's in a rowboat trying to paddle upstream against the Colorado River, and they're not making any headway. There's really nothing in between. And those are really the 2 struggling groups. There's one that's flourishing, and there's one that's trying to get upriver. You're like, well, why is the other one that's flourishing struggling? Because sometimes an enormous amount of wealth coming quickly can cause more problems than poverty. Now, the first century Christian was under a lot of stress, and they had the same problems. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but around 167 AD, there was a virus, some believe it could have been smallpox, that plagued Rome and Greece and much of the world. 2,000 people were dying every day. And this went on from 167 to 180 AD. It went on for 13 years. And the estimations are that somewhere up around 7 million people died. Now, you might say, well, we're going to far eclipse that. They had a far less population than we have. 7 million people. Economy was destroyed. There was great poverty across the globe. And I want to ask you a question right now. Have you probably done what I've done and made some financial decisions, good or bad, where you based it on COVID or 2020? Well, we got to spend this because, or we better stop spending because, or we're going to give because the ministry's still working, or we're not going to give because we're not working. And sometimes we make our decisions based on our circumstances. God says, I don't want you to do that. So I want to ask you this. Do you know the kind of financial freedom that God offers to you? Because today, I want you to see it. In the Bible, there was a group of Christians. Now remember, the church is only 40 or 50 years old at this point. And most of the church is made up of people in poverty. And in James 4:17, there were some wealthy Jewish believers. And James, the brother, half-brother of Jesus, had to say this: remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. You only believe the parts of the Bible you actually do. I only believe the parts of the Bible I actually live out. There's people say, oh, yeah, I absolutely believe you should go to church. Do you? No, you don't believe it. Oh, I absolutely believe that fellowship and worship is critical. Do you fellowship? Do you worship? No. Oh, I believe we need to tell everybody about Jesus Christ. Do you evangelize? No. I believe we should give to the Lord. Do you give? Oh, I will sometime. No, you only believe the parts that you actually live. You actually do. And as I'm looking at our situation today, I find that we are seeing two types of sins when it comes to finances. The first is the sin of commission. That means I'm doing something I know is wrong. Okay. Hey, you know what? I'm going to go spend. I'm going to run up my credit cards. Who cares? Let's eat, drink, be merry because tomorrow we die. That's unwise. That's a sin of commission. But there's also the sin of omission. And that's not doing what I know is the right thing. And guys, I'm about to share with you what the right thing is when it comes to being financially free. And I want you to know that if you live these principles, you will get there. In James, again, we read this. Remember, it is a sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. Look here, you rich people. Weep and groan with anguish because of all the terrible troubles ahead of you. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you were counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. This corroded treasure you've hoarded, will testify against you on the day of judgment. Now, those are some hard words, and some of you are thinking, wait a second, that's harsh. I'm not rich. Well, remember, we determined last week we are rich. We're Americans. We're richer than 6.6 billion people on earth, almost the entire planet. If we have $10 in our wallet, food for 3 days, and a roof over our head. So we know we're rich. But what was going on in this church? Well, unfortunately, the church in Jerusalem had rich people, and they became believers, and they started to treat the poor believers like dogs. As a matter of fact, James said, a poor person comes in, you seat him in the back. A rich person comes in, you seat him in the front. And the only way you could tell a person was rich back then? By the clothes they wear and by the things they flaunted. It hasn't changed a whole lot, has it? But back in those days, that's how they determined class. And the church should be the one place that never, ever happens. So what do we do to actually overcome the struggles that we have with our wealth? Well, the first thing we have to realize is God opposes greed, not wealth. This is important. A lot of times you'll see those of us who are on TV, there's TV preachers. I've joined that group, and many of them say you're poor and you're sick and you're struggling because you're in sin. I actually had a person say that about our ministry not long ago. They said, well, you guys would have a lot more money and you wouldn't have all these people dying if there wasn't sin in the camp. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is a broken planet. We are broken people. And by the way, everybody dies. I had to remind this individual, we've been around for almost 32 years. And that means more people are going to die every single day that have been a part of this church for decades. That's reality. There comes a day in your life where you know more people in heaven than you know on earth before you pass into eternity. So in this struggle, he wants to remind us God does not oppose wealth. So if you're wealthy, this is not against you. I've known many poor people who are greedy, and I've known many more wealthy people who are incredibly generous and really godly people, some of my best friends. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, the love of money causes all kinds of trouble. Some people want money so much that they have given up their faith and caused themselves a lot of pain. That's greed. That's greed. This is the very essence of what we're talking about. There's the extreme. God wants you to be a millionaire. No, the Bible doesn't say that. But if you become a millionaire, God's blessed you so you can be more generous. Or you got to take a vow of poverty. And by taking the vow of poverty, you have to be poor. Both are a lie. Jesus never said that. And it is a misunderstanding of Scripture to say that wealthy people are not living God's principles in their life. Matter of fact, I would argue that many of them are wealthy because they have. If you look back over the Bible, you'll find that of the 40 writers, only one author, God, but 40 writers, most of them were wealthy. Abraham was a multimillionaire. Job was the wealthiest man on earth at his time. There was David, Solomon, Barnabas. He was so wealthy that he gave large amounts of money to the church, the Scripture tells us. Joseph of Arimathea gave up his tomb for Jesus. Of course, he only rented it to him for 3 days for free. But at the end of the day, these people were wealthy. So God does not oppose wealth. He's also not saying that, you're going to be wealthy, not necessarily in riches, but you will have your needs met. Look at Proverbs 10:22. When the Lord blesses you with riches, you have nothing to regret. Nothing. Now, if you chase money, you love money, you push God's purposes aside, you don't fellowship, you don't share the gospel, you're not becoming more like Jesus, you don't serve in a ministry, then you're becoming wealthy through greed. So that's what you have to determine. That's what I have to determine in my life. Number 2, God gives us money as a path, not a destination. Now, so often we think of money as a destination. Well, when I get to 6 figures, that's when I've arrived. I read a study, and this has been somewhere 10 years ago now, so I can't even imagine what it's like now. But it said that when asked, they asked people that made, at that time, the average income for people in America, couples, and it was $32,000. They said, how much money do you need? How much more to be happy? And they said, $10,000 more a year. Then they asked people who made $50,000 how much they needed. And they said they needed $25,000 more a year. You start to see this pattern. So they asked people who made $75,000 how much money they needed to be happy, and they needed $150,000 a year. So they asked people who had $150,000 a year how much they needed to be happy, and they said $275,000 a year. Are you seeing that as they increased in their income, they increased in their greed, and they needed twice as much, 3 times as much? When they asked people who made $275,000 a year how much they would need to be happy, they said between $1 and $5 million. That's greed. Now, we understand in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, if you love money and wealth, you'll never be satisfied with what you have. This doesn't make sense either. The more you have, the more everyone expects from you. Your money won't do any good. Others will just spend it for you. If you have to work hard for a living, you can rest well at night, even if you don't have much to eat. But if you are rich, you can't even sleep. Now, I just briefly say this. My wife and I are not wealthy, but we are in a much different place than we were when we were raising our 4 children, when we paid for private education, when we did a lot of things. And here's what I do know. I didn't worry about stuff. But I've accumulated some things over the years, things I bought for my grandkids that are, the 2 acres at home and my house and some other stuff. And we're in a different place financially. Guess what happens? Now people want more. They take it. They steal it. It's an awful thing. And I've often said to my wife, and she has reiterated this because she's not materialistic, it was so much easier when we had nothing. And so the principle that's being taught here is just understand that it all belongs to God and it's all stuff. So we live by this principle. Oh, well, if somebody took it, they needed it more than we did. If somebody needs to use it, I'm going to give it to them and say, if I get it back, great. If I don't, it's up between you and God. The third principle is this. God says to save and give money, not to stockpile it. What does that mean? Well, a lot of people just stockpile wealth, and they think that's security. Someone said, you just got done telling us, to save and invest last week, and even today a little bit. What are you talking about? Well, there's a balance. Save, invest, but don't stockpile large amounts of money. You know what? Why people stockpile money? Why they just kind of put it in their farms or their barns and, put it in safes and in their mattress and diversify in different banks? For this reason. Because number one, they're afraid for their future. So who are they trusting? God or their money? And the other reason is because they're proud, even arrogant. It's stockpile out of pride for status, or stockpile out of fear for personal security. There are actually no TV shows on TV called Being Frugal and Being Wise. There's no show like Watch the Generous, but there is Watch Hoarders, or these people that have wealth in their storage units or in their old broken down, dilapidated houses they've been dead and gone from for 30 years. That's what people watch. Why? Well, that's intriguing why someone would have all that money and not use it. You know what else? When you're afraid of your future, people become afraid to use their money because they may lose their money. They become afraid to use their money because they may lose their money. There was a woman named Sylvia Bloom, and she was a secretary, I believe in the 50s or 60s in the United States. She was a secretary for a stockbroker who was a Wall Street millionaire. And so what he would do is he would give her money. This is back in the day when she had to actually go and place the bid. Now we can just do it on our phones, right? And she would take his investments to Wall Street and she would make the bid. Well, every time he gave her money to do that, she took some of her money, not as much, and invested in the very same stock. She accumulated $9 million. Her husband was a New York firefighter, and he was so desperate to get them out of financial debt that he worked 3 jobs. He became a pharmacist. He would sometimes sweep and janitor. She never told him she had $9 million. And she never used it. He worked his fingers to the bone. She worked hard, and they died and spent none of that money. He found out when she died that they had $9 million, but he died shortly after. Now, that's tragic. Why would you stockpile money? When you become afraid to use your money, it's because you think you're going to lose your money. Look at Hebrews 13:5. Here's the attitude. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you and never will I forsake you. We love the second part of that verse. Never will I leave you and never will I forsake you, but it has to do with loving God, not loving money. So why save? Let me just run these down quick. Why should we save? Why should we be wise to save our money? Well, number one, to practice self-discipline. When I save, I'm practicing self-discipline. I am paying myself. I'm like, okay, here comes my check. I give this much to the church. I think one of the greatest technological advancements for us today is to be able to give automatically. I love giving automatically. My wife and I give. It's the first thing that comes out of the paycheck through this ministry to the Lord. And then we give in many other places. That's a wonderful thing to do. Then saving, you have to be a little bit more intentional. I will actually take it out of the check and put it in my investments or put it into a savings account. You're paying yourself. Proverbs 20, verse 21:20 says, the wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. Second reason we save is to make my money work for me. We talked about that last week. Either you're going to work for your money or your money's going to work for you. Proverbs 31, and I love this because it comes as an example of a brilliant businesswoman. Did you know that? In the Old Testament. That's right. God has never once said that a woman's only place is in the home and in the kitchen. Now, the greatest thing she will do and the greatest thing we will ever do in this life is to have a family, to raise that family in the knowledge of God. But there are people that don't have children, and they're doing God's work just as well. But this woman sort of did it all. And she said this in Proverbs 31, or at least it was said about her. She goes to inspect the field and buys it. I mean, that was a big deal thousands of years ago. She inspects it and she buys it. She was a business tycoon. With her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She is energetic and strong and a hard worker. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. Her lamp burns late into the night. Gosh, that's one of the reasons she reminds me of my wife. Not only is she wise and frugal, she works hard. And then third, to be able to give to others. That's why we do this. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28 says, if you are a thief, quit stealing. Be honest and work hard, so you will have something to give to people in need. 2 Corinthians, one of the best passages on why we give financially in the New Testament, is right now you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. Guys, I have been the recipient of people's generosity for all of my life. And I know some of you are like, I'm not a freeloader. Hey, when you honor God, you serve God, sometimes the greatest way he blesses you is through avenues of people you never even imagined. James chapter 5 says this, your wealth is rotting away and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you were counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. This corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment. So there it is again. Whatever I accumulate will deteriorate. Now I want to wrap up just with this. In Luke chapter 12, we see this parable. Then he said to the crowd, don't be greedy. Owning a lot of things won't make your life safe. So Jesus told them the story. A rich man's farm produced a big crop, and he said to himself, what can I do? I don't have a place large enough to store everything. Later he said, now I know what I'll do. For fear, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones where I can store all my grain and my other goods. Then I'll say to myself, you have stored up enough good things to last for years to come. Live it up, eat, drink, and enjoy your life. But God said to him, you fool, tonight you will die. Then who will get what you have stored up? This is what happens to people who store up everything for themselves, but are poor in the sight of God. He says, don't stockpile. Proverbs says, when the wicked die, hope dies with them. Their hope in riches will come to nothing. There's many passages I could read, but let me end with this. Jesus paid our debt on the cross, so we're not spiritually bankrupt anymore. He rose again to prove that. He said that for all of us who admit, yes, I'm a sinner, and my sin's a direct assault on the character of God. Yes, I'm bankrupt, Lord. I can do nothing. So I literally turn to you in faith, and I believe that Jesus died and rose again, and I trust in you. He puts all of his riches to our account, the riches of heaven. He blesses us on earth, and he says, you're mine forever. And then he says this, now that you're my child, I'm going to take care of you. You work, you follow these principles, and I'll bless you so that you can be a blessing to others. Guys, don't forget that today. Financial freedom isn't about hoarding lots of money. It's about being a tunnel, a pathway to give to others.
I hope and pray that you found today's message impactful and encouraging. If you put your faith in Christ, please visit lnmw.tv and fill out a new believer form so we can celebrate your decision and walk alongside you in this exciting journey. Grace Church has campuses in Arvada, Colorado, and 37 churches in the Amazon jungles of Peru. We also consider each and every one of our viewers a part of our church. It is our desire to continue to love no matter what, as long as God allows. If you would like to prayerfully or financially support this ministry, you can do so on our website. Also, remember to follow Pastor Rick and Grace Church on the many platforms listed on the screen so we can stay connected with you. Don't forget to tune in and join us next week for another uplifting message. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best way to become a little more like Jesus today is to love, no matter what.